My subject today is multiculturalism. And together with Luke Hagendern, I did a study of multiculturalism in the Netherlands. As Sue has pointed out, we had the advantage of doing the study too soon. We carried out our survey actually 2 years before the eruption over multiculturalism and the explosive entrance of Pim Fortuyn onto the political stage. So why do I say we did the study too soon? Because our results demonstrated how deeply divisive multiculturalism is. And it was deeply divisive before Pim Fortuyn, before 9/11 for that matter, which is to say, not because of them. And when I say deeply divisive, I mean something quite specific. Characteristically, when there's a conflict in a society over an issue of tolerance, the cleavage, the fault line runs between center and periphery, between those who are at the margin of the society, who are poor and who are poorly educated, those with extreme views, the alienated, versus those who are at the center, who are well educated, integrated, well off in the mainstream of society. But what marks multiculturalism as a conflict of a special kind is that the cleavage runs through the center of the society. So, by way of an example, when circumstances make considerations of national identity salient, even those who ordinarily are not concerned about issues of identity are just as likely to react against immigrants as those who are concerned about them. That was the gist of our account. And boy, and this I'm happy to underline, subsequent studies have replicated it. The analysis, above all, of the 2001 election by Dutch political scientists, that's the election in which Pim Fortuyn came from nowhere and just surged to the front. And but for being assassinated, would have been prime minister. The support that carried him almost into the prime minister's office it wasn't because there was a revolt of the alienated and the intolerant. It was because of a huge stream of support from those who are at the center of society. And it's just because multiculturalism has pitted those who are at the center of society against one another that it has, as it has been implemented, politically failed. And I want to emphasize as implemented, because I have two concerns today. The first is to try and probe more deeply one of the principal reasons that multiculturalism is said to evoke opposition. And the other is to see if I can identify some conditions under which it can be widely acceptable. Now, some of the reasons why multiculturalism evokes opposition are just self-evident. Prejudice is a good one. Ideology is another. though not carrying quite as much weight as one might think. But the particular theme that I want to focus on is goes under the heading of the clash of cultures. And that's an idea whose meaning appears reasonably straightforward, but in fact is deeply ambiguous. And I'm going to explore three different interpretations of what one might mean by clash of cultures. And I mean to show you that the one that matters has nothing to do with culture. Now, multiculturalism can mean so many different things that I need to get a foothold. I mean, it's consensually agreed that it requires more than a willingness to accept, to tolerate, to put up with a cultural minority. So, at least as a starting point, I'm going to define multiculturalism as requiring a commitment to the right, emphasis on the word right, of a cultural minority to follow their own way of life. And the case that I'm going to consider is Muslim immigrants in the Netherlands. That figure shows you the level of support for multiculturalism, defined as the right of Muslims to follow the Muslim immigrants to follow their own way of life in the Netherlands. Manifestly, there's many that reject that idea. And those who reject their idea, there's more of them that feel strongly about it than supporters of multiculturalism feel strongly about their position. Even so, there's a majority, bare majority, as it happens, 54%, who align themselves with the idea of multiculturalism, which is, I think, really remarkable when you consider the storms that have erupted over that issue. But of course, all that I do is ask people questions and, as it were, write down their answers. And surely one has to ask oneself, what does it actually mean if you say that you accept the right of Muslim immigrants to follow their own way of life? After all, it doesn't take much to say yes. And then the question is this meaningful? So what would count as a criterion for someone taking a position and we counting it as meaningful support for the position? Well, the natural way to think about it, anyway, the natural way for me as an American to think about it is that a member of a majority is good-hearted enough to want to go out of their way to see that the members of a cultural minority do well in their new society. And I think that that's actually a route to go in an American context. But it's not so telling an expression of support in the context of a European welfare state. There's just the norm of the idea that those who have some need should get that the state should play a supportive and nurturant role. Illustration. Question whether or not children of ethnic minorities should receive extra attention at school. And the answer is yes, 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 yes. That's what all but a small minority say. So then what we were thinking in designing the study is, how can you tell if somebody is committed to a position? Well, one way to tell is, will they, do they want to stick to it, even when they're put under pressure or given a good reason for changing their mind? So immediately after those who took the position that they supported the policy of giving extra assistance to ethnic minority children in school, immediately after they took that position, then the interviewer said to them something on the order of, well, but what about Dutch children? Many of them have problems that are just as serious as the children of ethnic minority. Does that change your mind? Which was the best counter-argument that we could think of at the time. And as you can see, just a small proportion of those, just a little bit over 1 in 5, of those who had said that they supported extra assistance for the children of ethnic minorities flip over, whilst those who are strongly opposed to the right of Muslim immigrants to follow their own way of life in the Netherlands, about 1 out of every 2 is willing to abandon the position that they just took. So I'm going to start on the presumption that our measure of multiculturalism, of support for multiculturalism, is measuring something that is meaningful. That it's capturing, as imperfectly as survey measures always are imperfect captures of any sentiment, but nonetheless it's capturing something that represents a genuine commitment on the part of many, which therefore allows us to ask, what is it that makes multiculturalism so divisive? And why do those who reject it reject it? And I want to concentrate on the factor that's gotten the most concern, and that is the so-called clash of cultures. And so-called is not the happiest choice of words, since there is, in fact, a clash of values. Here is an item asking whether or not Muslim men dominate their women. And there is overwhelming agreement among the national majority that yes, indeed they do, on the order of 9 out of every 10. Here's another example. Do Muslims in the Netherlands raise their children in an arbitrary way? Answer, again on the part of an overwhelming majority, here on the order of about 4 out of every 5. Yes, indeed they do. Now it happens that the difference of views is reciprocated. From a sample of Muslims in the Netherlands, the same 2 items were asked except flipped around. And an overwhelming majority of Muslims take the position that Western European men do not show the proper respect for women, and by an almost similar margin that Western European parents are just too lax and permissive in the ways that they raise their children. So there is genuine differences about what's right and proper when it comes to how we should behave towards each other, towards our children, and what the status of women is. But does that have anything to do with the conflict over multiculturalism? And before I showed you the figure, you know that the answer is no way that it could have. Since the agreement, the taking exception to the norms of how women are treated, children are treated among the Dutch, is virtually unanimous. It could not possibly explain why some support multiculturalism and others oppose it, no more than any constant can explain a variable. But the conflict of values may take place at a different level. And maybe it's not the values that define what are socially mandatory ways to treat each other. Maybe what it has to do with, and is the core values of liberal democracy. And that's an argument that's now been put on the table. And so, with apologies for kind of mercilessly compressing arguments that are genuinely nuanced, the person that I have in mind here is Joseph Raz. And Raz has argued, I think eloquently, that personal autonomy is a linchpin of liberal democracy. Individuals, on his view, must have the capacity and the right to develop their talents and their outlook on life as they freely choose. And for just this reason, theorists of multiculturalism argue, autonomy as a value undercuts cultures like those of Muslim immigrants, which are grounded on the priority of the claims of the community, not individuals. So to test that, we developed a measure of the importance that people attach to autonomy. It has a number of different components, the importance of freedom of thought and action, independence, equal opportunity, and developing one's individual talents and abilities. Now, if the claim of some theorists of multiculturalism is right, then it ought to be the case that the stronger support is given to the value of personal autonomy, the stronger the opposition to multiculturalism. And that line of reasoning, just like the first, turns out to be empty. There's just virtually a flat line that's running across that middle panel. Those who support multiculturalism, those who oppose multiculturalism, are just about equally supportive of the value of personal autonomy. There is, though, a third version of the clash of cultures argument, and this one is more social psychological. On this third line of reasoning, the clash of cultures is only indirectly about culture. it doesn't really touch the conflict of the values of Western Europeans and those of Muslims. Rather, what's at work is the threat that some in the majority perceive to the identity of their culture. And what counts is a perceived threat, not an actual threat. And just so far as that line of reasoning is valid, then it should be the case that those who are more disposed to perceive a threat to their culture, their cultural identity, will be more likely to oppose multiculturalism. And yes, indeed, such is the case. It means just move up sharply as you go from left to right. And those who are most strongly opposed to multiculturalism are also most likely to perceive that their cultural identity is under threat. Okay? But that's just an opening, because the question then becomes, what actually is threatened? What do they see as being at risk? And a literal interpretation is that it's the values of their culture that they perceive to be threatened. And on the argument that I've offered you, no value is more important in a liberal democracy than personal autonomy. So here you see a regression, a readiness to perceive a threat to culture, to your cultural identity, on the measure of autonomy. That's an unstandardized coefficient. And yes, indeed, there is a relationship, but it's just the other way around. Those who are more supportive, more committed to the value of autonomy are less likely to perceive that, that their cultural identity is under threat. When it comes to the swirl of sentiments around a majority's aversion to a minority, things are often not what they seem. And even sometimes they're the opposite of what they seem. And here is a nice example, because an insistence on the value of one's country and the necessity for vigilance to protect its identity actually goes hand in hand with suspicion and disdain and contempt for fellow members of the in-group. Here's a measure of the extent to which Dutch perceive their fellow Dutch to be lazy and aggressive and complaining, and those who are most likely to say our culture is being put at risk by those outsiders are also the very people who are most likely to dislike their fellow insiders. And that's actually not a bad clue for what's going on, and what it is that perception, a readiness to perceive your cultural identity to be threatened by outsiders, what it actually signifies. There's a paradox to chauvinism, at least in a liberal democracy. those who are ostentatiously, the ones who take the most pride in their country, are also the most likely to be aggressive, to be hyper-nationalists. And so when you add a measure of chauvinism, you can see that it leaps to the front of the parade as a measure that is a signal of what it is that perceiving a threat to your culture is actually measuring. And that result suggests a final test. Because once you realize that chauvinism is involved somehow in reinforcing a readiness to feel threat, it's a signal that what may be at play here is a susceptibility to we-they thinking. So as a final component, we add a measure of prejudice towards immigrants. And it and chauvinism are the heart of the matter. That is what is being captured by this perception that our culture is under threat. It's not a commitment to that culture. It's a readiness to be intolerant. Now I want to turn to the positive side of this project. And the goal is to try and identify some conditions under which multiculturalism is more widely acceptable. And this part of the project is in progress now. So what I'm going to report are genuinely preliminary results. Yep.
Paul, can you say just a brief word about chauvinism and prejudice measures? Like, that's not prejudice against the immigrants. That's just general prejudice. I'm imagining, right? Like what are the just say a few words.
Sure.
How you measure this.
Let me say more than a couple of a few words. Okay. There is a set of findings that are strikingly robust, which show that people who perceive a threat to culture, or for that matter, a threat to their personal economic well-being, or for that matter, a threat to the economic well-being of the society, or for that matter, a threat to personal violence, or for that matter, a threat violence in the society as a whole, are more likely to be prejudiced against immigrants. Which is not at all surprising, considering that actually those test items read, do you feel that immigrants are a threat to your personal economic well-being, to the well-being of the country, and so on. So in the measurement of threat itself, the standard items always include a phrase, by immigrants, by a minority. And so our notion was that, those findings are so robust, the reason is that they're tautological. You're just measuring the same thing. So in the Dutch study, one of the experiments that we did was, we called it the decoupling experiment. Half the time, the threat measures were used in their standard formulation, and half the time, there was no reference at all to immigrants. When there's a reference to immigrant, every threat is correlated with prejudice highly and at about the same magnitude, with one exception. But of the 5, 4 are interchangeable. On the other hand, when you don't make the relationship a tautology, then one threat stands out above all the other threats, and that's a threat to cultural identity. It is true that concerns about economic well-being are not trivial, but they don't match in magnitude the association with cultural identity. So, and one other cautionary note. When the study was done, it was a time of prosperity. And one of the reasons that I feel such a great need to go out and start all over again is because it's a different world in which people in Western Europe are living. And for some of them, it's just an altogether different world. Concerns, economic concerns, which were secondary, I have to believe, have now become much more prominent in people's, in organizing people's thinking about politics and immigrants. But on the positive side now, the good news side. I want to go back to what it is that multiculturalism might mean. And this is taken from a work by George Crowder, which is unhappily, I think the book has the title of a textbook on multiculturalism, which is unfortunate since it is the clearest, most strongly argued analysis of multiculturalism of which I am aware. So it's a sequenced definition. The first requirement, all it's required is a recognition of cultural pluralism. That's not going to get you very far. The second condition is a little bit more challenging because it does make clear that there has to be some affirmative response. It's not good enough just to acquiesce in cultural pluralism. But it's the third condition which I think clearly constitutes what the hurdle is, and that's public recognition. And it's the meaning of public recognition that I'm trying to unpack. And I want to just by way of a warning, say it's not clear to me how precisely to think about the problem. I'm going to talk about it as though what the research problem is to find where citizens draw the line between what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And as a way to get going, that seems to me really useful. But in the end, I think it's the wrong metaphor. I think that that if we can succeed in the task that's ahead, we'll know that we've succeeded when we come out and we can identify a gradient, something that's continuous about how far citizens are willing to go. But initially, it seems to me there are three lines that stand out. And one possibility is that the majority balks at forms of public recognition that entail an acknowledgement of a change in the status quo. Another is that the majority draws the line at actions, even symbolic actions, that signal a change in the balance of power between majority and minority. And a third is that the crux isn't so much a change in the status quo, or even an implied loss of power, but it's a challenge to ownership. Whose country? Whose culture? Ours or theirs? Now, for those of a certain age, you should recall one of the real where the battle over multiculturalism in America took place, and that was over textbooks. And there just was a ton of rhetoric flying in all directions. And because the underlying intuition was that whoever got to write the history got to write the meaning that youth in school would take away as the meaning of the American experience. And so there was a great fight over control of textbooks, particularly in American history. So that led us to think about doing an experiment on textbooks. This comes from writing on the most recent CCES National Election Study. And what we wanted to do was to accomplish two things. One is to see if we could get some idea of a gradient in the willingness to accept diversity. And so in one condition, people were asked about textbooks reflecting ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, and in third condition, ethnic and cultural diversity. But the heart of it was that randomly they were assigned to conditions where they were asked whether they would agree or disagree with textbooks being either written to reflect the ethnic and cultural diversity of America or rewritten to reflect the ethnic and cultural diversity of America. If you take a look at the table, you can see right away it doesn't matter, as it were, how many dimensions of diversity are involved. What does matter, and what matters a lot, is whether people are being asked to approve the project of textbooks being written to reflect this diversity or being rewritten to reflect this diversity. And if you look at the bottom table, you'll see that that's a distinction that, not surprisingly, really cuts for the historic national majority, white Americans, doesn't make a difference at all for minorities. Now, a status quo hypothesis, if it was correct, would suggest that there should be a great deal of opposition on the part of a national majority to the history of America being written to reflect the ethnic and cultural diversity. And why? Because that's not the message of the textbooks that they grew up on. It would mean that they're acknowledging that there is a change in the status quo. But that's not clearly what's at stake here. There's something about rewriting that is a goad, and that provokes a kind of hostile opposition. And one possibility is that, that it's a goad because it opens up in people's mind the possibility of having to negotiate about the meaning of your national experience, about somehow having to sit down and come away with agreement with people on the other side about what's acceptable to them as well as to what's acceptable to you. And another, I think, a better bet, is that rewritten carries with it the connotation that the meaning that they had taken of the American experience is to be rejected, and there's a new one that's going to be put in its place. I don't doubt that that if there's an actual proposal to redistribute power, that will just be unacceptable. But there's something about this frontier that people are being asked to cross that I can see part of, but I can't see it all clearly. But the heart of it, I'm going to bet, has to do with the issue of ownership. And this is a final experiment. I was trying to figure out how we might make that issue intelligible, salient to individuals. And thought about about drawing a distinction between positively affirming the values and traditions of a minority and taking on an obligation to see that those traditions and values of a minority are secure. These come from another general population survey in America. And half the time, respondents were asked whether or not the values and traditions of immigrants, half the time about Muslims, should be respected or they should be protected. And there's just this striking difference, this line that people that they balk at. I guess I've gotten more and more persuaded about if you've actually been able to cut, as the phrase used to be, nature at her joints, then you ought to be able to replicate results, even in circumstances that are very different from the ones that gave you the original idea for doing the experiment. So thanks to colleagues at the University of Bergen, the experiment was repeated there on their general population sample, and the results, if I didn't give you the zip code of the country, you wouldn't know which one was Norway and which one was America. Conclusion. I want to underline 3 points. The first is that that the research on the clash of cultures, and quite possibly including my own, has been deeply misleading. I am quite confident that there'll be circumstances where, especially in Western Europe, differences over what's regarded as right and proper will flare up politically. But the fundamental motive force behind a concern for culture is a fear of those who are different. And it's a fear that arises not because of a commitment to the values of your own culture, but because of a deep disposition to intolerance. So, genuine clash of values, and that's a problem, but a problem that can be handled, I'm really quite confident, through mutual accommodation. The hyper-nationalism that goes along with a perceived threat to culture, that I see as a genie that has gotten out of the bottle in some countries, Greece being the one that comes to mind quickest. And finally, and I never expected that I'd come away with this view, because multiculturalism has been so divisive, does not mean that it is necessarily so. On the contrary, given the results that we have, and there's a squadron of experiments that are now being put in the field, I think that we're going to be able to identify conditions under which politicians can stand behind multiculturalism without paying a price for it that presently discourages them from doing so. Questions? Yeah.
The questions that were asked in Norway and the Netherlands, did you also ask people about their socioeconomic circumstance or ethnic mix locally where they live?
Yes.
One of
Yes.
the arguments is that certainly the political argument in Denmark, but also Norway, has been a sort of welfare state argument. As we think through these things, there's a necessity to protect the social compact. So I'm curious how when you start to control for these different groups, when you look at the subgroups within the population, is there any substantial difference across that based on local ethnic mix, or economic opportunity, or their expectations about participating in the welfare state?
In the studies that I've designed, which does not include the Danish study, we've had items on that aim to assess the likelihood of contact with an ethnic minority, at work, or when you go shopping, or where you live. Always without success. Although it is not clear to me that the problem isn't fundamentally a problem of measurement. I just have no idea how valid and reliable those measures are in general population surveys. I know I've always been impressed by work that Don Forbes has done, that whatever is observed at the individual level between measures of contact and measures of inclusion, at the aggregate level, it's strikingly stable that the greater the diversity, the greater the animosity. The other thing you asked me about was?
Socioeconomic.
Right. I wish I could, and since I have so many friends who are sociologists, report that we find that, that it matters very much. At any rate, for what I'm studying, once you take education out of it, the other measures that we have of income and status don't contribute very much at all. And I'm more confident of that with our American data sets than I am with the Western European data sets. I understand better what, for example, measures of education assess. I have more confidence in the validity of answers to questions on income in America than I do in the study in Italy, which we could have saved our money and just not asked them about income at all, because the last thing they were going to do is to tell us how much their income truly is. No, we don't get a lot of mileage out of that. Yes, Alan?
This is more of a free association than a question. I'm going to ask you to do the free association mainly. So the prompt is Jonathan Haid's Health Foundations theory. I don't know how much familiarity you have with it, but if you do, to what extent do you think that's helpful at illuminating what sort of dispositions individuals who are more likely to be just, hyper-vigilant and frightened of all varieties of threats, and then also very concerned about immigration, just as a personality. It's a kind of personality model.
Mm-hmm.
It's a personality model that is, according to the unfolding of Haid, based on group models of evolution and whatnot. So anyway, I'm going to stop at this point and just ask you if you're familiar with it, if you find it at all illuminating or helpful or not.
Well, I'll start with saying I'm an owner of the book. Okay? And the second thing I'll say is that as I started to read through the introductory chapters, my heart sank. There's just so much in the way of lumber of assumptions. The third is, notwithstanding being a fair-minded person, in one of the studies that we did 2 years ago, we included short-form versions of heights measures. I think in all, we took 8. We is Ted Carmines and I. So what is one of the problems of thinking in terms of hypothetical constructs like personality? And for me, one of the first and worst is the tendency to multiply constructs. I mean, before you know it, you have like 6, 7, 8. And then you just look empirically and ask whether or not you have any grip on which of them comes first or is more central, and which of them comes next or is more peripheral. And for me, the measures that I've used, and in particular this measure of psychological tolerance that was developed by Harrison Goff, they're extraordinarily powerful. They are robust in a way that I find mind-boggling. The CPI toll was developed in 1948 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to assess anti-Semitism, and as I said yesterday, its method of validation is criterion validation. So there's nothing in the content of the items that refers to groups of any kind. I think that the item that I gave as an example yesterday was most people are honest chiefly through fear of getting caught. So there's no way by reading the content of the item that a respondent could know that there's a measure of hostility towards an outgroup. We took that measure and, as it were, flew it over to Italy. Well, Harrison did us a great service and personally selected 5 of the 35 items that make up the scale. As it happens, the CPI itself has been translated in many languages, so we didn't have a problem with translation. It behaved in the Italian data just exactly as its counterpart behaved in the first study on race that we did in America. And then we used it in the Dutch study, where there was a hazard of translation. And it behaves just as it's as well behaved there as it is elsewhere. So you said free association. When I was in graduate school, there was the object lesson in what not to do and how not to do it was the authoritarian personality. Boy, they just got torn apart by people who were really very, very, very clever. And I can't think, actually, of a criticism that was made of that work that I reject. I think they're valid. And nonetheless, the authoritarian personality got the heart of the matter right. Not the stories about the heart of the matter, but it got the heart of the matter right, that there's people can be reliably rank ordered along a continuum according to the degree, intensity, and frequency of the hostility towards outgroups. And the analysis of conformity is, I think, exactly on the money. And it's not altogether clear to me that I don't use the F scale. But it is not clear to me that if you took, whether it's Haidt or anybody else, and asked about whether there's an additional explanatory power that you get in the analysis of prejudice, I am open to the idea that instruments that have really been thought through, like the Big Five, that there may be a component there that distinguishes itself. But I think that the test of whether or not you're actually illuminating the matter is whether you can account for anything better than we could have accounted for it 70 years ago.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Which is, I don't think my question is a great question, but I have to judge it by its results. It got a fascinating answer. So thank you very much.
You have a very sweet disposition. Yeah.
I was hoping you could say more what you meant about ownership being the key issue. There's a line people are not willing to cross, and it has to do with ownership. I was just hoping to hear a little bit more about what you meant by that, since it seems quite key to the story. The second one is I wanted to push back a bit on the emphasis on nationalism being, or hyper-nationalism being the issue. So I was very struck by the statistic that the same people who are likely to blame outsiders are likely to blame their own group members as part of the problem. And that seems that doesn't fit within my model of nationalism. I usually feelings come with a certain attitude towards your fellow citizens that is not one of distrust or relative to outsiders. So how is this a story about really nationalism or chauvinism when you this?
Okay, I'm counting on you to remind me about the first, because I'm going to start with the second. What has always stayed with me vividly is the experience in the United States of the late 1950s and the early 1960s, where there was what came to be known as the radical right, this won't mean anything to you, but the John Birch Society. And they are an exemplar, in my mind, of exactly this syndrome. I mean, they presented themselves as patriots, true patriots, and their whole cause was to show how America was being subverted from within, and everybody was part of this. Dwight David Eisenhower was not merely a dupe, but he was an active co-conspirator. This combination of extreme nationalism and complete aversion to everything that all the institutions of your society, the culture of your society, even people who sort of nominally politically should have been on your side, you should have seen on your side ideologically. And it came to be tied all together in this notion of hyper-patriotism. Richard Hofstadter did an essay on the paranoid style. And Ray Wolfinger and Barbara Wolfinger did a striking study of a Christian variety of the radical right when they met in Oakland, and that is a study that I'd highly recommend. I mean, that I really would urge you to read, because I don't know anybody who is tougher minded than Ray Wolfinger, who's as insistence on the difference between politics and psychology. And it's a remarkable portrait of the kind of madness that flared up. And when I look, and I mean, my field's American politics, so you know, attach whatever value you want to this. But when I look at what's happening in parts of Europe that I have not studied, I mean, it just seems to me that that there is exactly this kind of madness, and whether it can be contained or not. That I'm not confident about. It's just really going to be a question about whether the institutions are strong enough to keep on holding things together until the quality of life can improve. But things don't always come out the right way. You know, I said that, yeah, anyway, yeah, they don't always come out the right way. So your first question was?
What you meant by ownership.
Yeah, so here's how I try and think through what's going on. Since for me, what I do, I'm not making an argument at all for its importance, is you get a chance to see what's never been seen before. But that depends on being able to somehow get hold of an idea, just like textbooks being written versus rewritten, or protected versus respected. And each one gives you a chance of taking another step to try and find out, because there's nothing that I can deduce it from. And what I do is I keep a pad of words that seem to me by association to be capturing something about what it is that's leading me to do what I'm doing. And I had sovereignty all over it. And then I went, no, I don't think that's right. And I crossed it out, and I wrote ownership. And somehow that seems to me, that's evocative. But how to nail it, that I haven't figured out yet. I mean that at some point people are saying, you're asking us, boy, this gets me back to cultural identity. You're asking us to say that we're no longer who we are. We're something else. And that's just where I'm going to draw the line. We own this culture. So having told you that cultural identity is not the heart of the matter, or to the extent that it is, it's driven by prejudice. I guess that I have a view of it that there's substantial majority, and and what I'm looking for is some line of consensus. It's not just the number of people who are willing to go along with affirmative support for the rights of a minority. It's got to be that the lines are being drawn in a way that don't simply duplicate, say, for example, cleavage between left and right. I'm interested in whether there are thresholds which people on the political left share with people who are on the political right. And that's true for that's emphatically true for the experiments that I've shown you. And it's true not only in the United States, it's true in Norway. Where people balk is where it's the same point across the political spectrum. Yes.
Okay, so I'm Jacob Hacker, I'm director of ISBS, and I apologize that I was out of town yesterday and teach until 4:30. So I am basing this question on fairly limited evidence, and so tell me if you already discussed it. And it's actually builds to some extent on what you were just saying about the relationship between whether or not how distinct these are from other bundles of ideological convictions or beliefs. And I guess I'm just wondering how you think these attitudes form. I know that's a big question, and also what accounts for some of the differences, not big but real, that you see across countries in them. And is it, you suggested in your set of remarks about what's happening in Europe today that there's obviously can be sort of powerful external forces that will heighten they will make more salient these underlying beliefs. So if there's more resource competition or a sense of national crisis. But I'm interested in this, since this is your forte really is understanding the genesis of these as individual beliefs. I'm kind of interested in your sense of where these come from and how they vary across societies and why. It's a big question, but to what extent do you feel like you have some purchase on it?
I'll give you all of the purchase that I think I have. As I said, my field's American politics. And I want to insist only one of the areas is race. But it's one that I've thought a lot about, worked a lot on, and really has shaped my intuitions. And then I found myself doing research. The first country was Italy. And the project was extracommunitarians. Interesting as a choice of words to identify immigrants. In any case, over I went, and as I was going there, I thought, you know, they really, there's this desire to emulate America. Not only America's virtues, but America's vices. And as we've had a problem with prejudice, now, you know, my colleagues in sociology are picking up a problem with immigrants in Italy, and especially from North Africa. And I thought, they just have no idea what it really is like for a society to be riven this way. So I landed in Milan, and my colleagues drove me way up to Trento, and I went to sleep. I got up the next morning and went to get coffee, and as I was going, I saw this newspaper. Now, Trento's a very rich town in a very rich area. And the newspaper, though I didn't and don't speak or read Italian, the story was unmistakable. There was a house just outside Trento where extracommunitarians lived, and it had been burned, and everybody in it had died in the conflagration. And so I said to myself, well, now you know you have no idea what's going on here. None. And you better start trying to pay attention to what's going on. And that has been the experience as I've gone from Italy to the Netherlands to France to Denmark. And I've come away with this view that as deep as race goes in America, we're in a position to be responsive, in a way that I don't think even the best off countries in Western Europe are able to have found a way to accommodate the idea that they really are going to be pluralistic societies, and that Muslims are part and parcel of it. And you know, and once you start listing the differences, you know, the countries that were countries of emigration, not immigration. They're countries that, even though some of them are historical fictions. I mean, how long has Norway been a country? Nonetheless, there's this strong sense of solidarity and uniformity. The welfare state is a fundamental pillar of politics. And in the book on Danish politics, There's an analysis of support for the welfare state and the conditions under which immigrants are included and not included. And you know, it's only after other people look at your work and say that they find merit in it that you can go from having a result to a finding. But the result that, one of the two results that I think for me is most important is that we can identify conditions under which a commitment to the values of the welfare state, that covenant, promotes even-handedness. Just as much support for benefits going to immigrants or children of immigrants as to native Danes. Just as insistence a requirement that Danes meet the standards of civic obligation as immigrants. But those same values for another class of immigrants generate this blatant discriminatory outcome. Okay? Just same values. When it's the case of applicants being young, even-handed. Applicants being older, just an unmistakable double standard. The world is interesting. Perverse. I don't think that you can have a true, genuine appreciation of causality unless you have a taste for irony. So, yeah.
That's a good line. I will follow that. I was going to ask you to just say more about, could you just explain the distinction between values and prejudice as clearly as possible? Because I wasn't sure I completely understood. But that was key to one of your conclusions, which is that the fundamental motive force behind these clashes is prejudice, is a disposition to
Mm-hmm.
the outsiders. But is the mark of value, was that the commitment to autonomy the mark of values? Or was that just an example of a kind of...
Well, for me, autonomy is a canopy term. I can use it because it allows me to make a connection between my work and the work of political theorists. And it happens that the design of the instrument was rich enough so that we can generate a multi-indicator index of the extent to which you value the right of individuals to develop their abilities and outlook along lines that they freely choose. By prejudice, I mean a persistent, predictable, systematic readiness to belittle, disdain, punish, or push away members of a minority by virtue of their membership in the minority. It is hostility that's socially focused. There are other features that prejudice has. Stereotyping is one. Rigidity is another. But so far as my mode of research is concerned, those aren't features that actually we can instrumentally capture. But what we can capture is individual differences in the readiness to respond aversively, punitively to others. And that's what I mean by prejudice.
But if I could...
Sure.
What if the otherness consists partly in, you know, I mean, just anecdotally, if you ask people, I mean, it frequently happens in Europe that you'll be around a pretty liberal-minded set of people, but then you start talking about this question of immigration and you discover that they don't have the responses you expect, and what you often hear is the otherness characterized as a matter of values.
Yes, it's true that in interactions with people, you can find that those you think are liberal and generous in their sympathies can take you by surprise and respond with an animus that you didn't expect. But I think that the more relevant point is the one that you made about otherness. When we did the Italy study, I think there were like 9 co-PIs at that first meeting, and we were trying to design the instrument, and I've just told you how much I knew about Italy. But one of the things that made this study interesting to me, the possibility, was that then there were 2 streams of immigration in Italy. One was from Eastern Europe, and the other was from North Africa. And Eastern Europe was white, and North Africa was, though not entirely, mainly black. And the intuition of everybody was that, yes, there's an animus against people from outside the community, but the animus goes much deeper against people whose skin color is black. And that just was a totally reasonable, well-founded intuition. As it happens, we designed this experiment. And the intuition behind the experiment was this. I thought to myself, okay, suppose that I'm in a hotel room and evoking a couple stereotypes. There's a group of Italians outside one of my windows, and they're going on about how we've got all of these North Africans in our country and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, they're just loud enough so I can tell that they're mean-spirited in what they're saying, but I really can't pick up the details. And then outside my other window, I got another group of Italians, and they go on about, you know, how lazy and violent and criminal these North Africans are. But then halfway through, they switch and start talking about Eastern Europeans. Now, all I can hear are the tones. And the question that I put to myself is, okay, would I be able to tell the difference between this group, which just kept its focus on those black faces, to this, from this other group that started off fulminating against North Africans and then rolled over and started to express their views about Eastern Europeans? Anyway, that's the intuition. So we designed the study so that there are 2 batteries of measures of prejudice. And randomly, respondents, when they come to the first battery, the questions are always identical, but they're randomly assigned to being asked about Eastern Europeans or about North Africans. And they finish that battery of items. And then we ask him about a number of other things, and then rather late in the interview schedule comes the second battery of items of prejudice. And again, they're randomly assigned to Eastern Europeans or North Africans. Now, since the assignments are independent, okay, that means that we got a quarter of the sample that are initially asked about Eastern Europeans and subsequently about Eastern Europeans, a quarter that are asked about North Africans and then subsequently about North Africans, a quarter that are asked about Eastern Europeans and North Africans, and then Eastern Europeans. So there's actually a built-in way of looking at order effects. Now, by prejudice, I mean a consistent, systematic, predictable readiness to respond punitively and aversively to members of a minority. And if that's what you mean by prejudice, the question then, the test then becomes, can you distinguish those groups in the sample which responded to exactly the same group on both occasions. From those respondents, the other half of the respondents, who first were asked their views about one group and then were asked about their views about another group. And the answer is no, you can't. The responses are just as interknit when you switch the group they're talking about as when the group is the same. And that led me to the view that what matters is difference. It's not the particular difference. So far as prejudice is concerned, it's not the particular difference, it's the fact that you're different. And we did a replication of that in the Dutch study and found again the same consistency, even when groups are switched. It doesn't mean that groups are subjected to the same levels of animosity. That doesn't follow. But it does mean that that the primary thing that is, I believe, that our results show, in this case, I'll say our findings, that it's difference itself which sets you apart.
Have you done that with blacks and Hispanics?
On whites or with respect to blacks and Hispanics?
I was thinking with respect to blacks and Hispanics no, I was thinking whites, asking whites the same set of questions with the outgroups being blacks and Hispanics, so the same exact design.
Right, I haven't, but I think that that one of the ways that we're living in a world that's new is that it's now necessary to step back and say, okay, whites, how do they respond to blacks and Hispanics? Blacks, how do they respond to Hispanics? And ditto for Hispanics. I mean, you're not quite the same age as I, but it's the same. I grew up in America, where the division, where it was race that was at the heart of everything, and we're now in an era in which the question is not merely whether or not the historic majority accepts minorities. In a way, happily, we're in a position where minorities now have a degree of agency that they didn't have before. And how exactly they behave, that really is, that's a fascination.
I think we need to follow the 5:30, are we? Yeah. So.